Welcome to the inaugural episode of Your Authentic Executive. I'm Dr. Janyne Peek Emsick, and I am thrilled to have you join me on this journey of discovery and growth. Here on Your Authentic Executive, we believe that the heart of leadership lies in the stories that we live. After more than 3 decades of executive coaching and consulting, along with teaching leaders at both the MBA and doctoral levels, I've come to understand that the most powerful lessons come from mining the gold in our own life stories. Each month, we'll feature the story of an inspiring executive, delving into the pivotal moments and life lessons that have shaped how they lead today. And leading up to these rich narratives, I'm excited to introduce you to our Your Authentic Executive Sparks. These are 3 powerful lessons lifted from an executive's life that will light the way to our upcoming podcast. If you want to be the first to hear about new episodes of Your Authentic Executive and these illuminating sparks, be sure to follow me on LinkedIn or sign up for our mailing list at yourexecutivecoach.com. I can't wait to share these stories with you and explore the authentic leadership that lies within each of us. Welcome to the Your Authentic Executive podcast. Our guest today is Robert Vause, who is a dynamic executive who has proven to cast a vision and strategies necessary to achieve business objectives and foster long-term growth. Robert is collaborative, integrating with all business operations to develop, plan, and execute strategic midterm and long-term goals. He is a team builder and a creative problem solver. Robert is self-motivated, a thought leader, and Robert's a husband and a dad, a negotiator. And in addition, Robert's journey includes learning to push his brain and his body beyond its perceived limits, most notably with something called free diving, which we'll learn about today. Robert, welcome, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Janyne. I appreciate it.
So, Robert, we'll start at the beginning. Tell me a little bit about your formative years. Where are you from?
Originally from Eastern North Carolina. Grew up Fayetteville, Greenville, and then Ocean Isle Beach, bouncing in between. And around high school, I started working at a dealership, family dealership, and learning how to work, learning about a work ethic. Somewhere in between there, I learned about the way that I lead later on in life, but early on was you don't get an opportunity to lead what you want to do. You're asked to lead something that no one else wants to do or see the whole. And so the service department didn't have a leader, didn't have anybody scheduling. It was in problems. And so I was asked to go get it organized, go organized with tasks, what they're going to do, and try to figure out how to be profitable. At 16 years old, I didn't know a whole lot of that. And so working with grown men in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, there's a lot of lessons that I learned pretty quickly, and I don't know if I was ready to learn. Came back into that when I was 19 and had a better grasp of it because of some lessons that I had learned working for other people. And then went to college, learned a lot about business. After college,
I'm going to pause you right there because I want to, first of all, when we think dealership, we might actually think about a certain kind of dealership that might not be accurate. Tell me about the kind of dealership that you were working at.
So it's an agriculture, it was ag equipment dealership, purchase and sales, and 5 to 8 different lines.
So combines and tractors and
planters and hay equipment and tobacco equipment and cotton equipment. It was for the local market.
Well, so a very specific kind of dealership, and you're doing this. You're leading as a 16-year-old. So I'm thinking sophomore, junior. Is that kind of in?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Wow. Okay. So that's pretty extraordinary. Your ability to take on. How did you develop? Where did your capacity either to have the courage or or the ignorance, or what was it to kind of leap into a role like that where you were responsible for leading adults? Because that's pretty extraordinary an experience.
Truth be told, I was scared, and there were two drivers through that fear. One was some of the mechanics would pick on me, and I would have to pull nuts and bolts out of buckets of oil, and I was really tired of getting oil off my arms. The second was the service office had a fan and an air conditioning unit in it, and the shop did not. And so there was some give and take between my fear and comfort. And then on the other side, leaving my comfort zone. And so all that went into an equation that said, I'll take a shot at this. If anything, for short term, I want to stop sweating and have oil on my arms.
Got it. Got it. So it was somewhere around this time you actually had a different dream, or an additional. Well, I don't know that your role as a service manager was a dream, actually. So around this time, a dream started to form, right? And
Yep, it started about when I was 12 years old with my grandfather. I wanted to be a naval officer, and I wanted to be a fighter pilot. So he was a naval officer, and excuse me, he was a naval pilot, and he introduced me to naval officers throughout my time. So in deciding in high school, when you start talking about college and SATs, I decided that's what I wanted to do. Well, there was an issue. The Navy, as you can see, I wear glasses. My eyes were terrible. And so the Navy needs 20/20 vision to be a fighter pilot. I didn't have a good mentor to tell me you could decouple those. I thought, well, if I can't be a fighter pilot, I can't be an officer, I can't get into the Navy. Well, what does a self-motivated individual do when they're faced with an encumbrance such as that? Well, I researched on how to make my eyes better, eat carrots, and wear sunglasses. Then I found out about LASIK surgery, and then I found out about the cost of LASIK surgery. And so I used part of my junior year and my senior year to raise money with individuals in the church, my family, friends, those that were going to potentially give me a graduation gift, to pull their money into a pot that could go towards LASIK eye surgery. So they did, and I did. I got it. And so that was in December of my senior year. And so went to a naval recruiter after that and asked him, and he said that the Navy had made a final line in the sand that LASIK would not count towards 20/20 vision, that it was such a new technology. And so I was disheartened. I had to figure out, I had made a plan, and I'd had 6 months before I was about to go execute that plan, and was told there was no way that that plan was going to work. And so at that point, I decided to go to a small college in Eastern North Carolina, and said, let's get a degree under your belt and we can figure some things out later. I took business classes, enjoyed it, but there was still a drive in me, and I was still a little saddened about how to plan my next move in life. So what does someone do when they're trying to plan their next move and they don't know what they want to do? Well, what I was told is you backpack in Europe. I didn't have the money. I didn't have the money. I didn't have a big enough backpack, and I was not good at hiking. And so I got in a car and went to Los Angeles. I had enough money for about 6 months, or so I thought, 6 months. Getting out to Los Angeles, the standard of living and rent was about 3 months. Oh, wow. There we go. There's a picture.
There we go.
There's an old headshot.
Your dream was
to be an actor. And so I said, I've got enough money for 3 months. I'll stay for 3 months, and if this doesn't work, then I'll take my next step. And I was out there for 39 months.
Oh,
At 39 months, the world had changed. The economy, it was 2008, housing crash. And so there was some soul searching to do. And so I was offered a job in North Carolina, and that fizzled out. quickly. And then a family called at the dealership and said, "Hey, we need some help. We need help with service. We need help with used equipment remarketing. We need to help with a new revenue stream. We need to find different ways. We don't know what we're doing to go to the next level." So, yeah, I could do that. And so I jumped into that. I began taking on these tasks like management of service and profitability, used remarketing manager, e-commerce. I began to think about e-commerce, which I thought I was way behind thinking about it in 2010. Finding out now, I talk with individuals and their journey is just beginning on e-commerce. And so people are different in how they approach things. So there was overall general management of the dealership. And I got to a point where there wasn't any more growth for me. There wasn't any more, it didn't adjoin any of my priorities for growth and education. And so I said, it's time to look elsewhere. It's time to do something else. And so AGCO, which is your Ag Equipment Corporation, Massey Ferguson, Fent, Gleaner, they came calling and I took a role with them, which was, it was like akin to an associate director, managed a team of product specialists throughout the western part of the country. So Washington to West Texas, there was 12 of them. And then I worked horizontally with 7 account managers and then worked with distribution development on the network, the channel of dealerships, profitability, pushing more product through, pulling product away. It's making that balance. And then worked in Atlanta on the like sales and operations budgets, budgeting, forecasting for Wall Street. I really got what I thought at that time was a master's lesson in corporate management and understanding financial terms and then impacts downstream.
I'm curious, what was it like to go from having worked in a family business for really the majority of your work experience to that point, with the exclusion of your time seeking stardom out west in California, going from that experience to a much larger organization? Because that strikes me as a potential culture shift.
It wasn't, you're right. It was a culture shift. There was a change that happened. There were concessions that I needed to make within myself to adapt. And I realized that about myself, where my ego could take over. And so it was more of listening to learn. So what does that mean? Let's take it to a metaphor. I was used to, let's think about World War II. I was used to flying a World War II fighter plane, right? There's a lot of noise. It moves at a certain speed. You can fly lower and faster, but it takes longer and you can't go as far. I began to learn how to fly a jet at AGCO, which was, you could take your time, but once you were going, and there wasn't a lot of noise. So all the safety mechanisms that you had in place of are things going okay had changed, and the speed had drastically changed. So the speed of a decision changed. Thought processes advanced. Those are some of the things that I learned moving into that culture.
And I'm curious because you talked a little bit about going to college before heading out to California. And did you finish an undergraduate degree during?
I did.
You did. Okay. So you finished. When did you discover? It sure sounds like from very early on, you had a combination of a strategic acumen and a financial acumen. Mm-hmm. I'm going to combine that probably with a getting things done acumen. Like, when did you discover that you had some pretty distinctive skills at a very young age?
I'd say we'll split that into that's binary, right? It's the the old Robert Redford quote. No, knowing it and saying it are two different things. I knew I was different as a kid. I knew that I could see things that other people couldn't see, and I knew they wouldn't listen to me, and it would leave me isolated. I knew that I could, when someone was telling me something about money or profitability, I may not be able to speak their terminology on capital recovery structure, but I could look at a balance sheet and tell you where there was a problem. But because I was young, they would go, "You don't know what you're talking about." So I knew these things, but I didn't know exactly what they were until later on. When I was in college, I began to understand these terms and said, well, this is a different language, and I don't speak the language. And so those that do either don't believe me or don't trust me because I don't speak the language. It's like going to Germany and you know a few words of German, and when someone talks to you back and you say something silly like "Die Juli is bewölkt," and they look at you and go, "Why did you say the owl is cloudy?" And then they go, "I don't trust anything you say." Right? You, you don't know the language, and they don't trust that you do. So I learned that later, and unfortunately, by the time I picked it up, I was far along in my education. And so I said, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to have to pick this up on my own. And so I surrounded myself with people that did, or I had read books that did, or I listened to people that did and how they speak and what they would talk about. And then I'd write down these terms. And back then it was harder because then you had to find somebody to translate those terms for you. Now it's pretty easy where I can talk cash conversion rate. I can put it in Google and go, "Oh yeah, now I understand. Yeah, this is the same thing." That's how the progression for me planed out.
Got it. Got it. So you spent some time at AGCO, your first corporate experience, and what did you learn about yourself in that season of having that corporate role, which is a little bit more strategic role? You said it was kind of like being an assistant director. Is that right?
Yeah, like associate director. So what did I learn about myself? One is there was politics in play, and an ego did not fit well into that.
Mm.
The second I learned was how to manage individuals and motivate them remotely, which was a difficult task because I'm living in Atlanta and they're spread out Washington to West Texas. There's no way I can see all of them in 1 week. There's no way I can see more than one or two in a week.
Right.
And then the third thing I learned about AGCO was how important your level of education is to the knowledge that you deliver. And so you would go into a room and you would think, I am an expert on dealerships. I've managed dealerships. I know what's going on. And you go into a room and everyone else is talking about dealerships and you chime in and they look at you and go, why should we listen to you above anyone else in the room? And you say, well, because I've ran dealerships. And then the question would come back is, so you knew how to run dealerships. Do you know how to run them now? You go, it's a great question. It's a very great question.
So when you say education and that contributes to your being trusted by others, are you talking formal education? Are you talking informal education? When you think about education and learning, kind of what's your approach to education and learning?
It's both. You can bifurcate it into both the informal and the formal. There's some people that are very good at reading books and getting degrees. There are other people that enjoy immersing themselves in an opportunity and then seeing their way out of it. And you see both sides of the self-help books in the Barnes and Noble section right beside each other. Are they both right? Are they both wrong? Or they're just both different perspectives on it. And so I believe the education for me what works best is both. And then whatever else is out there is to say, what can I learn? What do I not know? And then what does someone know better than me? And then go listen.
Can I ask you about what you learned about leading a virtual team? Because I think that the percentage of individuals in the world right now whose teams are either virtual or hybrid has just, exploded. And I'm curious if you were to say, here's what I learned or how I've adapted it to today, because you lead a virtual team today, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like these are the top 3 things or top 5 things that are essential to effectively leading a virtual team. What would you say?
If we go to 3, we'll say exaggeration, over communication, and I'll explain that in a minute. And we'll do the 7-38-55 rule. So what's the 7-38-55 rule? And UCLA professor came out with this and said 55% of communication is done via talking. 38% is done via the face and how it moves. 7% is done by the inflection of the voice. So if you're not sitting in front of somebody, you're only getting 55% of the information. Knowing that going into a virtual meeting is, all right, I'm already at a handicap. I'm missing 45% of something. I won't be able to pick up that they're having a bad day, or they're burnout, or they're not interested, or that I'm talking too much and they're no longer listening. So that's where the exaggeration comes in, is you've got to exaggerate the characteristics that are good for the group, not good for you, right? If you say, I need you to listen, that's the ego talk. But if you're able to say, I'm not sure if they listen, I use a technique that you taught me, which is looping to listen. Oh, so you're saying it's difficult for you to go out on certain days because dealerships won't get engaged. Did I get that correct? Right? Sometimes the exaggeration even puts it in the form of safety in a no question. People feel comfortable answering with a no. They feel that they don't have to commit. So a way of phrasing that is it silly for me to want to come visit you and ride with you? No. I think it's a great idea, right? They feel safe. Whereas if you say, I need to come ride with you, what do you think about that? The alert's up. And so the 7-8-3-5, the exaggeration, forgot the other one already. Okay.
Over communication.
The over communication. So not only over communicate what you're attempting to say by asking for it back, like, what did you understand from what I said? The others is stay in front of it. Because you're in a virtual world, you say, well, I'll talk to them once a week, once a month, once a quarter. Because what you're looking for is loneliness. That started happening before COVID and after COVID. And so by getting that frequency, you can at least pick up on those characteristics. Because again, you're 45% handicapped from the information that you're taking in.
So even with virtual, like we're doing now, the Zoom, that equation would apply to, if we're face-to-face via Zoom, I'm still losing 45% of the data. That 45% comes when I'm physically face-to-face. Is that right?
Yep.
Got it. Okay. That's powerful. John Cotter, who's kind of the change leadership culture guru out of Harvard, He says that in the midst of change, we need to over communicate by a factor of 10. And I say to 100 that you've got to actually find ways to communicate more, communicate differently to meet this diverse, broad virtual hybrid audience that we have now as our team. And Patrick, who kind of stands on his shoulders, and he was the CEO of Schwab, who took them into the digital age and wrote a book that called Stacking the Deck, and that stands on top of John Cotter's work. And he says that leaders need to earn the right to communicate via email. And that's always kind of transformational because we all use email. You're in a global organization right now. And as a result, with all of the differing time zones and things that come through, emails come at all times a day as the only practical way of communicating. But if I was to throw that into your mix of tenets for virtual teams, what would you say about leaders needing to earn the right to communicate via email?
You absolutely should. That's one of the tenets that I have, that I've learned is humble, and it's a paradox of leadership. When you're not humble, then you won't have people to lead, and you will no longer be a leader. When you are humble and more towards them than the I, then there will always be them for you to lead. Having that humbleness goes into asking their permission, asking their advice, using them as a trusted resource, and saying it gets out of this modus operandi of leaders of it's I, and I know the way, and I'm responsible for delivering the result. I don't believe that's true for everything. I believe we're not, as leaders, we're not people movers. We work inside the process to make it better with the people that we have, including us.
The metaphor I often will use is if you imagine yourself as the drum major for a marching band and you see yourself as the leader, are you marching and you actually have a band behind you, or are you marching by yourself and you think it's behind you and you don't? That it's a whole interesting mindset of what does this mean to be responsible to bring people, either to bring people along from the front, from the middle, from the back, whatever that's looking like, so that you're actually moving together. You have an interesting story about how your current job came to be. And so it sounds like the last role, kind of the catalyst for that, came as a result of the Great Recession and the economy changing and seeing that there's something. No, actually, that was going back to the dealership. And then AGCO came in about 2016, so a period of time after that. And talk a little bit about how you made your current transition to your current role.
Yeah. So I ran into the same issue that I ran into at dealership. My development and education began to hit a ceiling. I said, I want more growth. I want to understand more. I just desire. I have this conviction to learn more. So a recruiter called me and said, hey, we've got an opportunity at Kloss. You'd be a region sales manager for a sales team. I said, hey, talk to me about it. And he did talk to me about it and I said, well, this would be different. It's more of a startup mentality, more focused on culture and individuals. And I said, I can adjoin to those topics. Met Eric, and I knew Eric previously, and so got in front of him. And when he talked, it was very much like a conversation like us. It was not an interview. So this is where a place like I can learn and make an impact. And I've got a lot to learn. So I was hired last day of February and started March 9th. And so March 9th, flew to Omaha for 3 hours, didn't even sign the payroll paperwork because they said you need to get to Jacksonville. There's a dealer meeting and a sales meeting. Eric wants you down there. So flew to Jacksonville, was there for 4 days. And he said, well, I'm headed back. He said, just head back home. We're trying to figure out this whole COVID thing. And he said, I'll call you on Sunday. I said, okay. He said, what do you need? I said, I mean, my computer, phone, all that stuff is there. I said, I don't even know if I'm going to get paid yet. And he said, we'll figure that out Monday morning. He calls me Sunday night and he said, just sit for a second. We think an announcement's coming out Monday. And then that Monday, the announcement came out where they shut down the world. And I went, oh. So,
your first week was going to the North American Home Office and then going to an offsite meeting in Jacksonville and going home and then learning. And that's where you're going to stay. Yeah. Had you met your team yet?
Just met them in the parking lot.
You met your team in the parking lot. Wow. You have said, most of my life, I've known how to fight for something, to get after it. When it's given to me, I don't know what to do with it. I like to fight for something. And so how did this situation, and if you want to talk a little bit about that quote, and then how did this situation stir up the fight in you?
Let's do what it stirred up and then where the quote came from, because it makes a good transition. So the what it stirred in me was, this is going to be tough. This is going to be tough. And I went, this is going to be tough for them, for my team, is because I'm an outsider. They shouldn't trust me from anyone, from a Saint or a Ringwing Brothers, Barnum and Bailey Circus. They should have no reason to trust me. This is going to be the most difficult thing that I probably do this year. And that's where that fight comes in, is because I learn. When I immerse my mind and body in something, I learn. And those lessons stay because I feel them throughout. And I'll get to that, why I picked up a hobby later. So using what I'd learned through the steps up, was able to manage a team remotely, visit them sometimes, and we had some good laughs along the way and built some trust. And how do you build trust with individuals in COVID? Well, how do you build trust with anyone in general? Is against your self-interest. That's how you build trust. And so an example would be checking into a hotel in New York when it's shut down and they see a Florida driver's license and they go, we're going to call the cops. And I look at the TM that I'm traveling with, the territory manager, and I go, I'm going to get arrested. He goes, that was pretty stupid. Here's for the against self-interest. I said, yes, it was extremely stupid and I'm in trouble. Are you willing to help me or am I going to jail? And he went, I'll get us both hotel rooms. And then that night when we sat and we had dinner, the conversation was different than the day before. Right? And so building that trust. So built the trust with the team after COVID. We start to come out of COVID into 2021. And then the organization went through a reorganization and established regions. They made executives for each regions. They would manage the entire book of business, parts, sales, service, and work with distribution. So 3 regions had already been handpicked, the individuals. Fortunately, the 4th region was the East, where I worked, and they had not handpicked anybody. And so my boss, Eric, had told me that, and he said, we're about to announce this. I said, well, when's the correct time to raise my hand? And he made the joke. He said, well, just let me know. And it was a throwaway comment. A good leader does that when he's busy. He says, hey, just let me know. Like, find a good time to let me know later and we can talk about it. Well, if I'm fighting, I'm going for it. And I was like, well, I'm raising my hand right now. And guess what? I'm going to bother you until I get this interview. And so whether he had already decided he was going to allow me to have an interview, or if that comment led me to get an interview, I won't be sure of that. But I did get the interview. And here's where that quote comes in. So I'm interviewing at the top level interview, that the first time I interviewed at a top level interview. So 2 VPs and an SVP. And the SVP was from Sweden at that time, Leif Magnusson. And he's pretty direct. He's calm, calculated. He's a learner like me, but he's also an assassin. He can pierce you and you know it. You can just see it in him. So you got to be ready. And for that interview, I prepared for what I thought was going to be flying on a jet, and it wasn't. It was a rocket. Lesson learned, right? My body is having to adapt on the fly. I'm having to think. I'm having to breathe. I'm having to change my methods. I'm having to shift my agreements and or my answers quickly. And so Leif saw that, and a fantastic SVP that he was before he retired, is he saw that. And so he was going to throw me off guard. He was going to put me back on my feet. And he said, we nominated 3 and we interviewed for this one. Anybody else would have been upset or pissed off. And that's the terminology he used, which did throw me back on my feet. And he said, what do you feel? And I said, I'm glad I got the opportunity. I said, because had I not, and you nominated me, you would have never seen the fight in me. And I said, I get to display that today. Ended up getting the role.
That is a wonderful story, and it captures the fight in you kind of from your whole life and figuring it out, and the challenge. When you're given a challenge, you've stepped up since you were a little kid, it seems like, and succeeded. I'd like to pivot a little bit here, because you hinted at it a little bit in the interviewing process of having being aware of what was happening in your body and your breathing. And you have embraced some, I call them extreme sports. I would think that deep diving falls into that category. And I think, tell me if this is a little bit of what it might look like as we think about what is deep diving. Is that kind of what it would look like in a pool? Because you've done this in a pool, correct?
Yep, that would be one version of it. Free diving.
Okay. How was yours? How would you look different?
Sometimes I do that, and sometimes I look like the guy in the no, I don't know if that's a guy, the individual in the background who's floating.
Oh, see right here. Okay. Oh, yep. Good. So either way, either you're going down to the bottom or you're floating. So that's what it looks like when you're doing it. The image that I had, which was why I kind of went and looked for an image, was like going way down in the sea. But this is something you figured out how to do in a local pool. So tell us a little bit about the journey of your going into extreme sports and what you've learned about your brain and your body. And then I'd like to then take us to how has that affected how you lead and how you navigate life. And so first of all, kind of what was the catalyst and your learning process in getting into these extreme sports?
Yes. I grew wary of being asked to go into difficult situations and maybe not being fully prepared, something coming up, and having a reaction. Your heart is racing, you have trouble breathing, you're sweating, you feel tense, and then you try to calm yourself down, and it just feels like sand. As you're trying to hold it in your hands, the tighter you hold it, the more that goes between your fingers. I said, this this is such a frustrating experience. I have to figure out some other way. It's because my education wasn't getting there. If anything, I was inflaming my drive to learn by the frustration of what my body was experiencing. I said, well, let me learn about breathing. And so I got into some of my books that I read, which was two by James Nestor. One was Deep and one was Breathe. Well, let's figure this out. Let's just start with breathe. And when I learned about breathing, there's different breathing techniques. And so I began to initiate those. However, I would still feel these reactions. I said, I'm missing something. So began to research free diving because that's where these breathing techniques lead into. So what is free diving? There's five different ones. There's static apnea, which is floating in a pool and just holding your breath underwater. Then there's, with fins, without fins, with weights, without weights. And that's for the competition, which is the image that you see, is how deep can you go and then come back, right? Well, the whole time they're holding their breath, it's one breath. I learned about the mammalian dive response, which is the body changes. When receptors under the eyes and under the lip feel cold water, the body says, all right, you're a mammal, you're in water. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to constrict all the blood vessels in your extremities. We're going to lower the heart rate and we're going to lower oxygen consumption. That's what the brain is telling the body to do. And as that happens, you relax. And so those individuals that go down and back, they're in a state of relaxation. What hooked me was wearing heart rate monitors. The lowest heart rate recorded by a free diver was down at 108 meters, and it was 14 beats a minute. And I said, that's it. There's no way I can do 108 meters, but that's it. And so I began to really get into static apnea and then free diving in a pool, which was the same thing, where the divers are going in a vertical fashion down. I was going horizontal. Same thing. You're holding the same amount of breath. You're working your body the same amount, just the distance. And the pressure is what's going to change because the pressure never changes. So what I began to experience is this urge to breathe that they talk about is not an urge to breathe. It's an urge to expel the CO2 out of your body. You're not looking for air. You're looking to get this CO2 out of your body. And that changed something in my brain to say, I'm looking at things wrong. Is there a misinterpretation or a translation that is incorrect in my brain? Do I have an incorrect concept? And so as I experimented more and more and pushing myself, what I learned is these aren't superhuman individuals. They've learned to relax through the process. So I started the process to try to learn how to relax in the face of something that I thought was difficult. What I found, Daniel Kahneman, right, in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, System 1, System 2, right, is the reflexive part of your brain begins to use the relax mechanism as a reflex. And so for the trigger and then after the trigger. And I went, this is where it is. So you're calm, you're breathing, you're lowering your heart rate, and then you get in the water, and then you just start going back and forth. And at some point you feel that urge to breathe and you say, no, not ready. And you begin to go a little bit further. Now, safety is a concern with free diving. You should always do it with somebody else. I do it with my wife in the pool. My daughter's there. She's not always paying attention to me. So I don't push it as far as I can. I understand where the hypoxic line is and how dangerous it is and what that can do to an individual. So I stay clear of that. I'm not able to push where I want to. The free divers that are competitive and are medal winners are 10, 11, 12 minutes. I'm at the 3-minute mark.
So if I kind of reflect back to what I'm hearing you say, one of the things that you learned in this process was that your brain and your body were telling you that you needed oxygen. And that was the long-standing, lifelong lesson that your brain had. So you'd spent your life, when you felt what you were feeling right now, your brain is saying, I need to breathe, I need oxygen. But then the science taught you that, in fact, it wasn't oxygen that your body was needing. It was an impulse to expel CO2, which was very different. And it became learning to manage that. In that process, you learned to engage what we would call executive functioning, your slow brain, your ability to make rational decisions when your limbic system, your fast brain, is telling you you're going to die.
Mm-hmm.
And your brain, instead, you trained your brain to say, no, I'm not going to die. I'm able to do this, and I'm going to fight through that impulse to breathe and the fear of dying, because I know that I can extend this process. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, there was. You had so much more elegance in the way you said it.
So that's because I'm not underwater and not breathing. So here's my next question. How does this translate to your leadership effectiveness? How does having confronted and been very intentional in adapting your stress response, your fight or flight response, your survival response, how has that translated into making you more effective as a leader?
In what I learned, it increased my well-being and said, I can go further than I think I can. I can do things that incite fear within me that think I'm going to die. Going into a leader is now going into those rooms, those situations. I've immersed my body into a different situation of when I walk into these rooms, I go, it's not going to be that bad. It's okay. And even when it isn't, and we get the hard ones, like a CFO comes over the top and of another company comes over the top, cusses you out, and then throws a legal document in front of you saying they're going to bring you to court. Now the reflexive brain is kicked in and says, there's a stressor. We're going to bring everything back down instead of bringing everything back up. What does that do to me as a leader? Is I hope the individuals that I'm with see that. I know I can feel it because it feels like what I call gravitas. It's weight of purpose, weight of meaning, and you can see it on people, and it's interesting. The question of, who's an example of who you can see it on? An actor, Morgan Freeman. A motivational speaker, Jocko Willink. A Harvard law professor, Sheila Heen.
Mm.
You walk and you see them walk and you go, they have just a fantastic well-being, and they already know the end, and they're okay.
And so I'm going to pop up a screen again here. It's going to show you, not you, but someone free diving, but I'm going to back up here kind of as we're coming to a close. And this is from a month ago, 2 months ago. This is from 2 months ago. And you mentioned Sheila Heen, and we both had the opportunity to learn about negotiating and conflict from Sheila Heen at Harvard in their executive negotiation program. And she just hits it out of the ballpark. Just an extraordinary. If you ever have an opportunity to participate in Harvard Law School's executive education program on negotiation and take a course from Sheila Heen, it's just amazing and transformational. Tell me a little bit about what you learned from participating in this program at Harvard Law School.
So there's the lesson I'm going to put into 3 questions, right? We haven't done that yet. We haven't done our 3, Janyne. The 3 questions is, 1, what did I learn is, what does arm wrestling teach you about shared interests? What does the forces and opposition of negotiation and leadership teach you about counterbalancing with acknowledging their existence? And then what is the danger of a made decision? Those are the questions that left me with the biggest lessons of, wow. What I learned tactically to deliver back to the organization that I work for Klaus, is, 1 is how to have a difficult conversation better and prep for it. And number 2 is how to adapt to a shifting, it's called BATNA, best alternative to a negotiating agreement. How to work with a shifting BATNA and a coalition. Right? So what does that mean is you got to change tactics quickly, and you got to be able to trust that you're changing is going to get you to the next step.
I remember when I went to Harvard, to Cambridge for the class, and in this, just amazing part of our country, historical part of our country, historical university. And I no more would have imagined myself taking a class at Harvard University than a man in the moon. And it was an interesting learning process for me. Did you learn anything about yourself while you were there, and assumptions that you have about yourself?
Yep, that was the toughest one. I got there early Sunday night and tried to calm myself down. That was one that was difficult. There wasn't a pool. There wasn't a place to quietly do breathing exercises. It was, oh boy. And so everything was moving fast. I got in that first day and I didn't know anybody. Some didn't speak good English. And I said, I don't belong here. I'm not supposed to be here. And I began to write in my iPad. I said, where's this feeling come from? What is this insecurity? This isn't part of a leader. This isn't part of you. This is something in your childhood that was missed, or something that hurt you. But you paid your dues. You got invited to the program. Now let's learn. And that feeling went away within minutes of the first speaker presenting. And it went from me back into the them, which was, oh my, look at all these lessons. Oh, how can I grab hold of this? Do I think the team will like this? And after that, it was off to the races. When I left there, I went, it was such an impactful experience. I said, I wish I would have known about Harvard when I was 19, when I was a junior in high school, putting money together for LASIK surgery, because that would have been my alternative. We don't know if that would have happened or not, but at least I could have built a plan for a shifting BATNA for when the Navy route didn't work out. And I told myself at the end of it, I said, it had taken 20 years, but I got here. Let's go again.
Well, Robert, thank you for your time today, for your walking through quite an extraordinary story, growing up and working in a family ag equipment dealership and having extraordinary leadership opportunities as a very young person that you capitalized on, of your going for dreams, being a Navy pilot, going from that to being an actor in California, and coming back and helping the family business again and really sharpening your leadership teeth at that time. And I love that your quote, most of my life, I've known how to fight for something and get after it. When it's given to me, I don't know what to do with it. I really like to fight for something. And so thank you for sharing your story. We're going to include a list of books that Robert has recommended. From his reading list, you can tell that he is an avid reader, an avid learner. And once again, Robert, thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Janyne. It's been a pleasure.